Welcome back, and thank you for joining us again this week as we discuss 2002's Brown Sugar starring Taye Diggs and Sanaa Lathan. Welcome back both from previous episodes, How Stella Got Her Groove Back with Taye Diggs and Love and Basketball with Sanaa. In this movie, they are working professionals who have known each other since they were kids, grew up, went separate ways, and came back together once Sydney moved back to New York, and their common bond was their love of hip hop. Now, in this movie, Dre, played by Taye Diggs, struggled with the idea of selling out as he pursued his success in the music industry, and we all know that the music industry is certainly a tough one to break into and to succeed in. So there is this idea of what it means to sell out, and we're going to look at that this week. Selling out is basically a common expression for an artist or a group who has compromised their sounds, their principles, their fundamental fan base in exchange for widespread success. And sometimes selling out can also mean allowing, a car company or a beverage or other commercial entity to use their music to promote their product. And selling out is often associated with the attempt to tailor material to a mainstream or commercial audience. For example, when a musician alters their material to encompass a wider audience or rewrites their songs to appeal to censors. I think we all have seen this happen. And in turn, they hope to gain greater recognition and a wider fan base. And of course, this tends to alienate some of their earlier fans who were drawn to their original sound, original lineup, etc., so they become, quote, sellouts. Selling out can also refer to bands and artists who sacrifice their musical integrity or sound, sometimes due to pressure from their labels or management, to help gain profit from a wider audience and thus making their music more mainstream. Now, when I hear of this concept, the idea of selling out, of altering your music, of altering your sound, I think of the band Rush, who did none of that during their career. Now, of course, they had pressure from their label and their management. For whatever reason, those geniuses wanted Rush to sound more like Bad Company. I don't get it. But they chose not to cave to that pressure because they knew they were growing a kind of grassroots audience, a word of mouth audience who didn't really hear their songs played on the radio at that time, but had heard from maybe a cool older cousin, a friend, a neighbor, someone who really had a good ear to music and began telling people, hey, you've got to listen to this band. Now, they achieved great commercial success throughout their career, and it really all began with this album, 2112. And I'm not going to be a poser and act like I have been a Rush fan all my life. I've always heard of Rush, I've always known about Rush, but it was through my exposure from my boyfriend, who is a very dedicated and very knowledgeable Rush fan, who began introducing me not only to their music, but their background, and just the idea of thinking about bands who have sold out. Rush to me is the example of what bands and artists should aspire to. True, exposure, recognition. Maybe not everyone likes Rush. There might be reasons that you are not a Rush fan, but certainly you have to admire their musical integrity and the fact that they have always been so loyal to their fan base. So I wanted to give them a shout out as I kind of compare and contrast some other bands and artists. So to better understand the idea of selling out, let's go back almost 90 years. At the time when radio and big band music and jazz was kind of first on the radio, artists recognized that to make any money in this industry, they would have to appear on radio shows sponsored by big companies. Think of, Old Gold cigarettes used to sponsor radio shows. And I wonder if a cigarette company sponsoring something heard by a large audience would have any sort of effect on our lives today. I don't think so. I don't think it's anything to worry about. Regardless, there were many bands and musicians who found widespread radio and later television, music, etc., fame through these initial sponsorships. So it became something that audiences recognized, that their favorite band was just going to be on the Old Gold Music Hour, and that's how it was. And it really was not until the 1970s, when more independent labels began to emerge, that counterculture movement also implemented itself in the music industry, and audiences wanted to have more realistic and stylistic artists who represented the turbulent times and how they were feeling. And so this idea against, Old Gold cigarettes, for example, sponsoring, a musical act, it became passé, and new audiences recognized that they did not want big corporate sponsorship in their music. The attitude held by those who disliked the idea of selling out toward advertising was largely negative. The late great comedian Bill Hicks claimed that, quote, any band that licensed their music for advertising was off the charts and off the artistic roll call forever. Neil Young mocked the fact that songs began to be used in advertising with his 1988 album, This Note's For You, the video for which parodied corporate rock and was patterned after a series of Michelob ads that featured contemporary artists such as Eric Clapton, Genesis, and Steve Winwood, who all shilled for major labels at that time. And this is a callback, but the video also featured a look-alike Spuds MacKenzie. And kids, if you have no idea who I'm talking about, just ask your parents. They will know who Spuds MacKenzie is. And initially, MTV banned Neil Young's video after legal threats from Michael Jackson, from Pepsi, from all of these major companies. However, Canadian music channel Much Music ran it immediately and thoroughly. And after it became a hit on Much Music, MTV caved and put it into heavy rotation, winning it MTV's Best Music Video for 1989. Also nominated for a Grammy in the Best Concept Video, but lost to Weird Al Yankovic's Fats. And again, kids, if you don't know what I'm talking about, ask your parents. So in the 90s, CD sales began to fall and record companies became unwilling or unable to afford the push new bands needed to become established. And with it, sponsorship of bands by major companies began to be more and more acceptable with younger audiences, with even minor record labels devoting time and money toward marketing deals with well-known brands. By the 2010s, the use of licensing of artists in commercials had become an accepted part of the music industry, and even those who would have previously considered part of the 1970s resistance to, quote, selling out, have been used in products such as former Sex Pistols Johnny Linden advertising Country Life butter, never heard of it, and Iggy Pop endorsing car insurance. What a world. As a proud Gen Xer, I became familiar with the term sellout when bands from the 70s and 80s began selling their rights for their music for use in commercials, and I shudder to think what an abysmal nightmare a commercial for an antidepressant set to Nirvana's Lithium would have been. And again, kids, if you have no idea who I'm talking about, talk to your parents. More than likely they are a Gen Xer, and come on, we're the coolest generation. That's all there is to it. An infamous example of artists accused of selling out is Metallica, and let's contrast them with Rush. So their 1991 self-titled album has been considered the turning point of the band's direction, and the band was called, quote, the poster boys for musical unintegrity, end quote. However, some fans did not consider the drastic change in sound on their album to be significant enough to be considered, quote, selling out. And again, taste is subjective, while others have accepted the change as part of a natural evolution to any band's style. Ultimately, the Black Album, which it became known as, became the band's most successful album, going platinum 16 times over. So this differing reaction demonstrates the difficulty in labeling an artist or a group selling out. And an artist may be accused of selling out after changes in artistic direction. And again, I implore you to compare some of Rush's earlier albums to some of their later albums. The sound changed, some of the instruments and the technology changed, but fundamentally, Rush remained who they were at the core of their existence throughout. So what do you think? Does commercial success mean that an artist has sold out, or is this an invalid and outdated concept? This is just my opinion, so take it with a grain of salt, but here's what I think. Explore new music, like what you like, and go back to listen to some of yesterday's music. You might find a style of sounds, styles, and successes that you like. So go ahead and buy into that subscribe button so that you never miss a thing. As always, new episodes of the Real Relationships podcast drop every Thursday. New episodes of this show also drop every Thursday. We are on Spotify, Apple. For the podcast carrier of your choice, we are also on Facebook, Instagram, of course, YouTube. So come and check us out. We also welcome your comments, suggestions. You can drop us a line at therealrelationshipspodcast@gmail.com. And until next time, we will see you soon. Thank you.